Hello, good evening, and welcome to Scotland at 7, or just slightly a little bit past. There has been a lot of technical Yankee Doodle along here, and now everything's all dandy. You'd think it had something to do with the date. My name is Donald C Stewart. I'm delighted to have you here tonight in order to join with me alone. It's that time of year where it's very difficult to get people dragged away from the beaches and dragged away from the weather that we're experiencing in order to join us. But rest assured, for the rest of the week we will have guests who will be with us in order to make comment and talk about what the news is. But for tonight, for today, 'tis just I. And of course, on the 4th of July, there's a lot of things going on in the world. And as we normally do, we start with the Ukrainian update on day 496 of the illegal Russian attempt to occupy the sovereign state of Ukraine. And today, Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin has said that Ukraine had launched a drone attack on the Russian capital and its region, which was temporarily disrupting flight operations at the Vnukovo airport. NATO members have agreed to extend the term of Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg's contract as Secretary-General for a further year. Vladimir Putin has told a virtual summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that the world faces an increasing risk of conflict due to economic and financial instability. He also took the opportunity to thank the leaders of China and India for their support during the recent Wagner mutiny. Suspilne reports that a man and a woman were killed this morning in Russian shelling of Ukraine's southern city of Kherson. 3 people have also been injured by Russian shelling in Ukraine's northern Chernihiv Oblast. Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defence Council, Alexei Danilov, has described recent days of battle as fruitful for Ukraine in terms of destroying the resources of the Russian forces. And Russia's state-owned news agency TASS has reported that the Ukrainian power line connected to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has been cut off. Ilana Milishina, a prominent Russian journalist who works for Novaya Gazeta, and lawyer Alexander Nemov were attacked today and suffered serious injuries after several masked men in the Russian region of Chechnya forced their car to stop. Miss Milishina had her head shaved, several fingers broken, and was covered with green dye in the attack, according to human rights group Memorial. Nemov was stabbed in the leg, and the attackers, if there was any doubt, made it clear they were being targeted for their activism and reporting. At least 3 people were killed and 19 injured in a Russian drone attack yesterday on the northern Ukrainian city of Sumy. A 5-year-old boy was among the injured. Yesterday, Ukraine said its troops had regained more ground along eastern and southern fronts in what President Volodymyr Zelensky described as progress in a difficult week for Kyiv's counter-offensive against Russian forces. US Ambassador to Russia Lynn Tracy met with the jailed Wall Street Journal reporter Ivan Grishkovich for a second time in Moscow yesterday, and she accused Russia of conducting what she described as hostage diplomacy. President Zelensky and the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz have called for the extension of the Black Sea grain deal, which allows the safe export of grain and fertiliser. Russia has brought 700,000 children from the conflict zones in Ukraine into Russian territory. Grigory Karasin, head of the International Committee in the Federation Council, Russia's upper house of parliament, said on Sunday. Ukraine accused Russia of illegally deporting children. The United States has said thousands of children have been forcibly removed from their homes. And going from the Ukrainian update, we come to closer to home with a shock announcement today for some as to one of the rising stars within the SNP who has decided to come out of Westminster. Noting Mary Black's decision, First Minister made comments and released a statement that she will, acknowledging that she will step down at the next general election. The First Minister said that Black had been a state trailblazer and that it is difficult to overstate the impact that Mary Black has had on Scottish and UK politics since her election in 2015 as the youngest MP ever, and more recently as Deputy Leader of the SNP at Westminster. The SNP's Deputy Westminster leader stated that the unhealthy and poisonous working environment at the House of Commons was a major factor in her decision, alongside the unsociable working hours involved in being an MP. First Minister Youssef said that Mary Black's criticism of Westminster serves as an important wake-up call to those who are determined to safeguard our democracy, adding that the case for modernising our political system is stark. We must make sure it works for everyone, so we don't deter people from standing for election or speaking out for what they believe in. He finished by stating that despite choosing not to stand again as an MP, I know Mary will continue to make an immense contribution to the cause of independence, and I look forward to working with her in advancing our cause. In Mary Black's interview with the Newsagents podcast, she stated that it had been almost 10 years since her election as the MP for Paisley and Renfrewshire South, marking almost a third of her life. She is the 6th SNP MP to announce they will not contest the next general election. And from her statement issued today, she also talked not only of it being humbling to have been trusted by the people of Paisley and Renfrewshire in three general elections, of course, since her initial election into Westminster. She praises the support of local SNP branches, countless activists, and the many collective years they have dedicated to campaigning for a better Scotland. Mary Black returning, therefore, to the point of being a volunteer, something we'll get to later on, of course. Furthermore, today the Resolution Foundation report has shown that there is a widening prosperity gap in the United Kingdom. This is a report by the Resolution Foundation that says that the United Kingdom has been living through a period of relative decline that has proved toxic for those on low to middle incomes. The report warns that poor economic growth and a failure to fairly distribute wealth could see poorer household incomes rise by only 2% over the next decade, compared to 12% for typical households and 14% for those in the top income quintile, widening the income gap between typical and poorer households from £18,000 to an astonishing £21,000. It further states that these changes would see 1.8 million people, including 1 million children, fall into relative poverty. The report says that this prosperity gap is a result of the United Kingdom's government's approach to the benefits system, where amounts rise at best by prices rather than wages. This means that basic benefit support, is at the same level now in real terms as it was in the previous century, in 1992, and that is despite a 51% growth in GDP per capita since then. It warns that if this approach continues, it could see the Universal Credit Standard Allowance fall from 14% of earnings in 2025-26 to just 12% in 2035-36, and further to 10% in 2045-46, compared to 17% at the beginning of this century, 2000-2001. Mike Brewer, chief economist at the Resolution Foundation, warned that economic growth, the essential precondition for rising wages, is sorely needed after 15 years of stagnation. But it's equally important that this rising prosperity is widely shared, and called for a strategy that delivers productivity growth alongside reforms to employment, pay, benefits and housing costs, including pre-distribution through higher wages and redistribution through the benefit system. Commenting, the SNP Social Justice spokesperson David Linden MP said that Brexit austerity cuts and Westminster mismanagement have set the United Kingdom on the path to long-term decline, with stagnant wages, poor economic growth and worsening living standards. Adding that the Scottish National Party will continue to press the United Kingdom government to introduce a real living wage, boost benefits and deliver urgent help for families. But independence is the only route to real change. At the next election, voting SNP is the only way to secure independence, tackle the cost of living and get rid of unelected Tory governments for good. And the Scottish National Party have not only made comment on the Resolution Foundation report, but warned today of growing threats to the National Health Service from Westminster. This comes as former Conservative Health Secretary Sajid Javid has called for a review into the NHS, describing it as unsustainable in its current form. Of course, Javid had previously suggested introducing extra charges to see a GP and attending accident and emergency, ending a founding principle that the NHS is free at the point of use. Last week, research from the King's Fund, which focused predominantly on data from the NHS in England, found the UK underperforms significantly on tackling its biggest killer diseases because the National Health Service has been weakened by years of underinvestment. The research did, however, show the public service model of the NHS scored well on low administrative costs and not saddling patients with medical debt. The recommendation was not to keep talking about changing the model, but about providing sufficient funding. The author of the report, and my apologies if I get this pronunciation wrong, Siva Anandachiva, told the Times that Sajid Javid was wrong to attribute high UK mortality rates to a structural flaw in the NHS. He went on to say it's a management problem rather than a structural problem. If anything, the structure is helping us and we're not making the most of a nationalised health service. We have all the systems for a more stable planning environment, but funding is incredibly lumpy and volatile. You have long periods of underinvestment followed by massive periods of catch-up. If you want to expend political capital, spend it on fixing social care, not in having this debate. Separately, as we knew, research by the Nuffield Trust published last November, which is now nearly 8 months ago, found Brexit had worsened the UK's shortage of doctors in key areas of care and led to more than 4,000 European doctors choosing not to work in the NHS. Similar data released by the Nursery and Midwifery Council, NMC, which goes further back to last May, found the UK has 50,000 fewer nurses than pre-Brexit. The SNP has warned that the NHS therefore faces growing threats from Westminster, adding that while health has devolved, this does not provide an adequate defence against the UK government's financial decisions. Commenting on the issue, the party's health and social care spokesperson, Martin Day MP, said that Brexit and hostile migration policies are deterring thousands of doctors, nurses and care assistants from joining the NHS. At the same time, Tory cuts and underfunding of the NHS in England are having a knock-on impact on the money available for services in Scotland. Adding that no government should shy away from progressive reforms where they are needed, but too often Tory and Labour Party talk of reform is really code for increased privatisation, fragmented services and undermining the founding principle of an NHS free at the point of use. And moving on to more news with regards to the current economic crisis that most of us are facing, there is new analysis revealing the cost of the mortgage crisis. And this is the impact and costs of the mortgage crisis on mortgage holders in Scotland. And it comes from the House of Commons, whose analysis, which was commissioned by the SNP, found that following the Bank of England's interest rate rise to 5% on the 21st of June, households with an average, which is £166,431 mortgage in Scotland. Now hold on to that, it's £166,000 mortgage in Scotland, an average. If they're on an average 6.37% 2-year fixed rate deal, will be paying over 50% more every month than they would have paid a year and a half ago. In November 2021, the average 2-year fixed rate mortgage was 2.29%, which would see a typical Scottish household paying £729 a month on a 25-year mortgage. As on the 29th of June this year, the average 2-year fixed rate was 6.37%, leaving the same household paying £1,110 a month, which represents an increase of £381 a month, which represents a whopping £4,572 in additional interest per year. A full-time worker in Scotland on the national living wage would have to forgo their entire wage for more than a quarter of the year, which equates to 3.224, that's something like what, 3 months and a week, just to pay the additional mortgage interest. With the UK already suffering higher inflation than the European Union and the United States, Schroders plc, a British multinational asset management company, forecast last week that the United Kingdom is heading for interest rates of 6.5% by the end of this year, which is the highest since 1998, and warned, "We anticipate rates at this level will drive the UK economy into a recession." Now, if the average 2-year fix were to rise accordingly, which would make it 7.87%, the same household with that average 166,000 odd mortgage would be paying £541 more per month and £6,492 more a year, an increase of 74% on the average rate in November 2021. Now, this news comes amid growing warnings about the impact of Brexit on the economy and UK inflation. In June of this year, former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney warned that Brexit was causing a weaker pound, higher inflation and weaker growth, with the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, forecasting a 4% hit to gross domestic product, GDP, and 15% blow to the United Kingdom's trade intensity. SNP housing spokesperson Chris Stevens, having heard the analysis, commented that housing is a fundamental need that no one should have to go without. But Westminster is making it impossible for many first-time buyers to afford their own home, and it's putting mortgage holders and renters at risk of losing their homes through no fault of their own. And we go from that astonishing statistics to some astonishing words having been said today by a UK government minister. This comes as the UK Government Veterans Minister, Johnny Mercer, no stranger to controversy with things that he has said in the past. He's reportedly argued that while food banks remain a lifeline for some dire cases, it is not correct, he claims, to say that people use them only when they have no choice. According to Mercer, the use of food banks is a personal decision and not an accurate measure of poverty levels across the UK. He also stated that using food banks was a matter of personal budgeting and that being in the military came with a good wage and quality of life. This was after he had been challenged on Sky News today over recent reports of the effect inflation has had on service personnel, including the set-up of an unofficial food bank at a major RAF base, people no longer being able to afford subsidised meals at their mess halls, and sailors declining to go home during periods of leave because of high travel costs. When asked about if there was any need for those in the military to use food banks, Johnny Mercer said that these are personal decisions around how people are budgeting every month. I don't want to see anyone using food banks, of course I don't. But we're in an extremely difficult time around the cost of living. Later he added, I don't think food bank use is an accurate portrayal of where levels of poverty, relative or absolute poverty, are in this country. I don't want to see anybody using food banks, but I think that being in the military still affords you a good wage and a good quality of life, and that will continue to be the case. Cost of living pressures have reported led to military personnel and their families seeking aid from the estimated 2,500 food banks operating in the UK. Well, the Trussell Trust reported that a record 3 million food parcels were distributed across the United Kingdom last year. And we go from an astonishing claim to an astonishing, less than astonishing. The fact that the illegal migration bill has suffered another defeat in the House of Lords, and the UK government's so-called small boats bill has now suffered multiple defeats in the House of Lords. Peers voted Monday in favour of limiting the amount of time that children and pregnant people who claim asylum after arriving by irregular means can be detained, and were also in favour of preventing LGBT plus people from being deported to a country where they would have a well-founded fear of persecution. The vote came following 4 previous defeats last week by the upper chamber on issues such as modern slavery safeguards, a bar on backdating at deportations, and asylum help for unaccompanied children. Yesterday, the Lords backed a move by 204 votes to 168 to force Home Secretary Suella Braverman to consider an asylum claim from people arriving by unauthorised routes if they had not been removed from the UK within 6 months. Peers then also voted to retain the 24-hour limit on the detention of unaccompanied migrant children and to maintain limits on detention of accompanied children to 72 hours or 1 week with ministerial approval. Peers further voted to lower the threshold of harm a person must be expected to suffer on removal to a third country in order to successfully appeal against their deportation. Lords also voted in favour of the court deciding what a reasonable period of immigration detention would be, as the bill would have seen those powers transferred to the Home Secretary, with the government insisting it would have retained judicial oversight. Now, these defeats come amidst rising numbers of people crossing the Channel to seek asylum, as well as a ruling from the Court of Appeal last week that it was unlawful to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. The government is now challenging this ruling. And as we go from something that is national news to something that's been a little bit more international, but certainly more virtual, as Instagram's Threads app to launch amid widespread anger against the new Twitter's restriction. As Twitter users seek out alternative platforms, Meta, which used to be Facebook Incorporated, has announced an app called Threads, which intends to be offered as an alternative. The app, which is set to launch later this week, appears to share a similar user interface to Twitter, with similar features including reposting, liking, and allowing users to limit who can reply to their posts. Threads puts Meta in competition with other Twitter alternatives such as Blue Sky and Mastodon, which have been created since Elon Musk took over the platform last year and the site became more difficult for users to access. Last week it became a requirement to log into Twitter in order to view the site. Previously, people without Twitter profiles could view tweets. A limit was also imposed on the vast majority of users who do not pay for the platform, restricting unverified accounts to viewing 600 tweets a day, which was later upped to 1,000. Today, the company has announced it will make its list-based TweetDeck product, which is mostly used by businesses and news organisations, accessible only to users paying for Twitter Blue. Elon Musk's moderation decisions, including lifting bans on far-right accounts and the site's increasing instability, has not just been displeasing its users, as many advertisers have paused or reduced spending in the past few months. Following the rate limit change, Blue Sky had to momentarily pause new sign-ups, currently only available by invitation, to cope with demand. Jack Dorsey, who is Twitter's co-founder, currently working in Blue Sky, criticised the Threads app. And as we go from there, we're off to America to, of course, on this day, the 4th of July, when our American cousins across the pond are celebrating it being the 4th of July and Independence Day and all that malarkey. The news that's coming across is the US investigators focus on lawyer John Eastman as investigation into Trump's efforts to block Biden's 2020 election win heat up. John Eastman, of course, is a former Californian law professor who was involved with schemes around fake electors and other tactics to help Donald Trump's attempt to win the 2020 election. And he is now being closely scrutinised by federal and state investigators, facing possible disbarment, according to former prosecutors. Eastman is one of many lawyers whose legal stratagems have been closely examined by special counsel Jack Smith's investigation into Trump and his accomplice's attempt to block Biden from taking office. The fake elector scheme was key to Trump's strategy of undoing his election defeat and involved Republican electors in 7 key battleground states, signing certificates falsely declaring themselves duly elected and qualified to affirm that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. Eastman has drawn attention in another inquiry in Georgia led by Fulton County District Attorney Fannie Willis, who is anticipated to bring criminal charges against Trump and some of his legal team and advisors in August. Other legal advisors, including Rudy Giuliani and ex-Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, have drawn the attention of the federal and Georgia inquiries. Smith's inquiry, which includes Trump's inflammatory talk to a rally that was also addressed by Eastman and Giuliani before the Capitol attack on January the 6th, has now received grand jury testimony from former Vice President Mike Spence and ex-Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Smith has also gained cooperation from two Nevada fake electors who have testified before a Washington grand jury. According to the New York Times, investigators from Smith's office have also interviewed Giuliani under a proffer arrangement, which does not preclude charges against him, seeking to ferret out details about the faked electors' plotting and related schemes. And with all of that going on in the world outside, we of course like to try and bring some cheer towards the end, and it's a little bit balanced as the Scottish Government have announced that they're considering proposals to license animal care services for businesses such as dog walkers, canine fertility services and dog groomers in order to improve animal welfare standards. And a lot of conversations I'm hearing particularly about canine fertility services during the explosion towards those who were perhaps not as ethically interested in the welfare of dogs as normal fertility services for puppies in the past and since. Consultation is of course now open on that proposed licensing scheme aiming to ensure consistency in standards across the animal care services sector in Scotland. Regulations would apply to the dog walking businesses that we see and know well, dog grooming services, canine fertility services, but also pet accommodation services, riding establishments and businesses involved in other equine activities. The consultation will also seek views on introducing greater regulation of greyhound racing in Scotland. The consultation will run for 12 weeks and close on the 26th of September 2023. Commenting on the proposals, Environment Minister Gillian Martin said that with greater regulation of the sector, we can give more confidence to people that are interacting and buying services from animal care service providers that these businesses are operating to the highest possible welfare standards. Going on to say, however, we must also strike a balance with any proposed regulation to ensure those already operating to a high standard aren't unduly affected. That is why we are consulting, and I encourage organisations, businesses and the public to make their views known. Scottish SPCA Chief Superintendent Mike Flynn said that at the moment there are many animal-related vocations that are completely unregulated. We have sadly encountered cases where suffering has been caused in these industries due to negligence or lack of knowledge. Licensing these activities will help to safeguard animals and people when using these services. Adding, we would encourage individuals, businesses and groups to respond to this consultation and to have their say on animal welfare in Scotland. So I'm quite sure I could probably say you heard it here first, but that's certainly something that's very much worthwhile to get involved in. And that is it for this evening. But before I go, there's a few things. One, I want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So as always, to everyone who's donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment on behalf of all of the volunteers here and all the people involved in Broadcasting Scotland, a grateful thanks. Thank you very much indeed. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers, which would enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. And if you are involved anywhere in social media and you see tweets or any Insta posts or on Facebook or whatever, anything to do with Broadcasting Scotland, we are of course exceptionally grateful if you would repost, retweet, like, subscribe, do whatever it may be in order to get the message out there. And for those American cousins who are joining us this evening on this very auspicious day, on behalf of us all here at Broadcasting Scotland, a very happy and sincere 4th of July to you. And as we close this evening, it is good night and thank you for watching.